There's a court hearing in New York today on a case that's drawn national attention. A defense attorney is hoping to get murder charges against his client. CBS News correspondent Richard Roth reports the reputation of the victim.
It was August 31st, 1985, and artist Ana Mendieta had just arrived back to New York City from Rome, Italy, where she had been living during her residency at the American Academy. She would only be in town for 13 days, and had planned to stay at her husband's apartment at 300 Mercer Street, not her own cozy place located on 6th Avenue. There was a tenant she was trying to evict there, and it would just be easier for her to stay with her husband, Carl Andre, during her time in New York City, even though he was in Europe and wouldn't be back in the States for a couple of days. If this all seems a bit odd, it was. The newlyweds, who had only been married for 7 months, had lived apart for most of their relationship, and Carl and Ana had never moved seriously toward getting a place together until recently. In fact, Carl was in Europe and was probably seeing his Berlin mistress, a person who Ana knew of and was not happy about. Carl didn't know that Ana knew. Ana had secretly been collecting evidence of her husband's indiscretions, there were more than one, for several months. Ana seemed ready to steer this short mistake of a marriage to its end, as she was soon planning to file for divorce on the grounds of Carl's cheating. The relationship had been rocky for some time, and even friends and acquaintances later reported becoming uncomfortable with the sometimes open hostility between the two. Ana's short stay in New York that September was part of her plan to get what she needed together so she could call it quits with Carl, according to those who knew her best, namely her sister Raquel and her best friend Natalia. In her first 2 days there before Carl arrived back, she learned that her tenant problem was solved, so she planned to be able to clean out that apartment. She wanted to make an appointment with a divorce attorney. She also, strangely enough, planned out a 12-person early birthday dinner for Carl to be held on Sunday, September 8th. Sadly, Ana Mendieta would not get her second chance. And the enduring mystery in all these years since was the question, was Ana Mendieta murdered? Hi and welcome back to my channel. My name is Leigh and I'm a mixed media artist. Here on YouTube I do art and painting videos, and I also do a series of weird art videos covering haunted art, art history, art and true crime, and more. Today's video is part 2 of my videos on the death of Ana Mendieta. If you haven't watched the first video, I highly suggest that you click off this one and go watch that one first, since today we're just gonna jump right into where we left off. Today's video will cover the circumstances of Ana's death, the police investigation, and the trial of her husband, famous sculptor Carl Andre. If you're enjoying these types of videos, I would love it if you would give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and or ring the bell to be notified when I upload new content. So with all that out of the way, let's get to today's story. We will start with September 7th and 8th, 1985, the morning of Ana's death. On the night of September 7th, Ana and Carl spent time together at apartment 34E. The following comes from Carl's statements to the authorities. After Ana went for a jog around Washington Square Park, she arrived home at 9:30 p.m. and they ordered out Chinese food. Then they sat and watched television. The US Open, the Yankees game, Dracula, and Ana drank wine. It wasn't mentioned whether Carl drank too. Ana was a little tipsy that night, and Carl maybe was too. Everyone who knew the couple didn't hesitate to classify both as heavy drinkers, with Ana usually getting loud and deliberately provoking people, and Carl tending to turn into like a self-focused know-it-all. At 3 a.m., they were watching a Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn movie called Without Love. Ana found the plot to be absurd, so before the movie ended, she got up and asked Carl to come to bed with her, but he declined, wanting to finish the movie. This upset Ana, according to Carl, and she went to bed alone. When the movie ended, Carl got up and went into the bedroom. Ana wasn't there. In fact, she wasn't anywhere in the apartment. She hadn't left, he would have seen her go. The only indication that something was amiss in apartment 34E was when Carl looked toward the 2 large windows overlooking the city. One of the windows was open. At about 5:30 a.m. on the morning of Sunday, September 8th, the night manager of the, I'm going to call it the Delion Deli, not exactly sure how it was pronounced. Anyway, it was a 24-hour grocery store that was either the Delion or the Delion, but I'm going to call it the DeLion. It is now permanently closed, so if anybody knows what the name was, you can let me know. Harry Leandro was in the kitchen of the deli when he heard a small explosion and a shake on the roof above his head, which obviously was greatly concerning. The 24-hour grocery store took up a small portion of the first floor of the building at 300 Mercer Street. At the same time, Ed Mosey, the doorman at 11 Waverly Place, went to get his morning coffee at 5:30 a.m. at the DeLion Deli. On his way, he claims he heard a woman scream from up above. Someone saying, "No, no, 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 don't," in a pleading but self-confident manner, whatever that means. After this, it was silent for about 4 seconds, and then he heard a, quote, explosion. It was a sound he'd never heard before, which was saying a lot, seeing as he was a Vietnam veteran who had done active duty. The call came in at 5:30 a.m. for the nearest officers to the location. The call said there was a, quote, jumper down at 300 Mercer Street. 4 officers arrived and met with the deli manager and the doorman from Waverly Place, who had said about the scream from high up. They looked up at the 35-story Mercer Street building, a high-rise that loomed over the roof of the deli. The officers were directed to go through the basement of the Mercer building to reach the roof of the deli. A freight elevator brought them to the rooftop, and there they found the small, mangled body of a woman dressed only in blue bikini underwear. It was, of course, Ana Mendieta. At 5:29:26 a.m., a call had come in to 911. 911 operator. Police, where's the emergency? Carl Andre. Yes, my wife has committed suicide. 911. Say again? Carl, my wife has committed suicide. Where are you calling from? Carl, I'm calling from 300 Mercer Street, apartment 34E. 911. 34E. Carl, yes. What floor are you on? Carl, 34. 911. The 34th floor? Carl, yes. Okay, what happened exactly? Carl, what happened was my wife is an artist, and I'm an artist. And we had a quarrel about the fact that I was, more exposed to the public than she was. And she went to the bedroom, and I went after her, and she went out of the window. She jumped out of the window? How long ago did this happen? Carl, I don't know. I don't know. Okay, you don't know. Did it happen recently? Did it happen just now? Carl, oh, it happened just now. I can't tell you. There's a lot to say about this 911 call, some of which I'll discuss later. But for now, let's say this is the first version of events to be put out there about what happened, and it doesn't match any of the later retellings of the events in apartment 34E that morning that came from Carl. It's just one of the many things in this case that makes it hard to get to the actual truth, because there's a lot of he said, she said about even the simplest things. I found many discrepancies between articles I read and also between other information and the Robert Katz book Naked by the Window, and I tried to stick mostly to that book since the sources and quotes he used are meticulously cited. So in order to get to the real truth, we need a good solid police investigation, right? Well, we didn't exactly get that either. After going to the deli roof, 2 officers went up to apartment 34E. They were named Connolly and Capolupo. At the apartment, they were met by Carl, who was described as looking distraught and rumpled. He was cooperative and polite, but also acting odd. Of course, that's not to say that acting odd means a person is guilty of anything at all, because people handle trauma in many ways. We're talking about a guy who allegedly just found out that his wife fell 30+ stories to her death. How shocked, horrified, or out of it would any of us feel? Carl was wearing just overalls and said to the officers by way of greeting, "My life is over. My wife is gone. I can't believe it happened. It's a tragedy. I don't know what I'm going to do." First of all, he told officers that he wanted to wash his hands, which he did in the bathroom under the watchful eyes of the officers. He then closed a door to a small room that was full of papers and files strewn messily everywhere, and said, "I don't want you in there." The apartment had a living room and a kitchen, bathroom, a bedroom, and the messy room that Carl referred to as the attic. As the officers walked through, they asked Carl about the incident that had just occurred, the one he had called 911 about less than an hour before, and they already got an altered version of the story. Carl said they watched a movie, and then Ana wanted Carl to come to bed with her. He said no, and she got mad and went by herself. 15 minutes later, he looked in on her and she wasn't there. He then came back 10 minutes later when the movie ended, and she still was not there. Then he called 911. Maybe I should have gone to bed with her, he said. In that sense, maybe I did kill her. So far, nobody had mentioned him killing her. The officers questioned him. Did you see her jump? No. Did you look out the window? No. Did she write a note? No. How do you know she jumped? I just know. Officers noted that the bedroom was in a disarray, like a tornado had been through it. A white folding chair was on its side. Clothing and bedding were on the floor, and the bed was a mess. One pillow still had the distinct impression of a head in it. A white t-shirt hung from the doorknob. In the kitchen, wine and champagne bottles littered the floor. When Carl noticed one of the officers looking at all the bottles, he said he collected them to use as candle holders. Then, Carl wanted to show Officer Connolly a book from his shelves that contained photos of his artwork. As he showed him, he said that he was an artist in his prime. And his wife was an artist too, but he was a very successful artist and she wasn't. Maybe that got to her, he remarked. And in that case, maybe I did kill her. Again, nobody accused him of this. The officers also took note that Carl seemed to have, as they said, a fresh, wet scratch on his nose and one on his arm. And when asked, he claimed to have received the marks days before on the balcony. They took Carl willingly to the station by 6:25 a.m. on September 8th. An autopsy on Ana's body was performed by Joaquin Gutierrez, a pathologist at the Manhattan mortuary. She was a normal adult female, aged 36, and stood 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighed 93 pounds. He found multiple skull fractures, a bruise on her right eyelid, and an injury to one of her fingers. Her velocity on impact was 120 miles per hour, with her fall actually denting the deli roof, which meant that almost all her bones were shattered and most of her organs were lacerated. The pathologist noted, circumstances undetermined pending police investigation. She was erroneously described as a white female. Once Carl was at the police station, he was officially interviewed by Detective Finelli. They ran through the events of that morning again, and again, Carl's story changed. This time, the events were much the same until about 3 a.m., when Ana got up and went to bed. Carl now said the movie ends at 3:30, and he went to the bedroom and found Ana was not there. He waited 20 minutes, then he called the police. Finelli observed the oozing scratch on Carl's nose, like a piece of skin had been pulled off the nose. He also noted the fresh scratch marks on Carl's upper arm. He asked Carl, was Ana drunk? No. Could she have left by the front door? No, I would have seen her. What do you think happened? I don't know. Do you remember that you said to 911 that you had an argument with her? I said what I said. Finelli mentioned that an argument conflicted with his story. His reply, whatever I said, I said. How did you get that scratch? I was on the terrace and a gust of wind blew the door into my face. Carl said it happened 10 days before, despite the fact that it was proved later that Carl hadn't even arrived in the US from Belgium until 8 days before. Could the police go to Carl's apartment and photograph it? No. Eventually, he did agree in writing to let them photograph the apartment, except no photos of himself or his, quote, attic room. At 11 a.m., officers went back to Carl's apartment with Carl. He asked to make a few phone calls. He used his personal address and phone book to make phone calls on the black phone on the entryway table. Odd calls, according to the officers who couldn't help but eavesdrop. On one call, he got an answering machine. He left a strange message. Hello, this is Carl. Ana is dead. We'll have to cancel our dinner engagement. Sorry. 4 to 5 calls were made to cancel a dinner party, all with him saying a, quote, tragedy has happened, or, quote, something that is unmendable, but never actually saying what happened. Police photographers arrived and took 7 photographs of the bedroom and the living room. A photograph of the rooftop indentation was taken because the body itself was never photographed before it was removed, with the excuse being that they wanted to get the body out as soon as possible so people in the surrounding buildings wouldn't be able to see it. While everyone was at the apartment, Anna's friend Natalia called and Carl answered the phone. It was a wake-up call that she'd promised Anna when they hung up that morning around 1 a.m. Remember that phone call. It will be important later. Natalia asked Carl, "May I speak with Anna?" "No, you may not." "Well, isn't she there?" "She's not here right now." "Would you ask her to call me when she gets in?" "Yes, I'll give her the message." Officers learned from neighbors that there may have been a violent fight between the two 3 nights before. One neighbor reported seeing Anna in the hallway sobbing and saying, "I'll do it. I'll really do it." Bobby Tong, the neighbor in 34F, heard a noise in the Andre bedroom and a crash in the early morning hours. That wrapped up the police investigation into Carl's apartment for now, and the officers brought him back to the station. At around 3:30 to 4 p.m., Detective Finelli observed an unnamed person whom Carl had obviously called come to talk to Carl as he sat waiting on the bench, and he watched Carl hand this person a set of keys, the apartment keys, which was perfectly fine at this point since Carl wasn't charged with anything yet. Then came a third police interview. Finelli asked, "Did you have an argument last night?" And Carl replied, "None." He claimed to know nothing about the fighting the neighbors mentioned either. They went through Carl's statement again, but this time the detective had Carl write it out. And if this is even possible, it was even more off from his first several statements and the 911 call. He wrote that he called police later instead of after 20 minutes, and wrote, "I had the horrible belief Anna had fallen from the window," instead of what he said originally, which was, "I went after her and she went out of the window." He changed suicide from the 911 call to jumped to fallen. Well, which one is it? Because those are very different activities. This planted the seed for another scenario, that Anna's fall was accidental. Carl was formally arrested after he refused to be interviewed on video or have his photograph taken, and then asked for a lawyer. Once he was arrested, his marks were photographed. The nose scratch, the 3 to 4 inch long upper arm scratch, like a cat scratch, and a new mark the officer discovered, a red mark on Carl's back just below his neck. To check out the terrace door hitting him in the face story, Carl's passport was checked. The most recent stamp showed Carl arrived in the country Saturday, 2 days after the door allegedly hit him. At 1 a.m. Monday, Anna's sister Raquel was finally notified by Detective Finelli himself about Anna's death. In all those phone calls, Carl never once contacted Anna's family, even though Carl and Anna had been together for 5 years. Once Raquel learned Anna's fate, she called her brother Ignacio Jr., and he in turn drove to their mother's home to deliver the news in person. The next day, Raquel and her husband Tom met with Finelli, where he insinuated that he believed Carl was guilty, but that they had come up short getting him to confess. He said the suicide story seemed pretty unlikely, since, as he told Raquel, Carl had been going on and on about how happy he and Anna were. He had bought her a car in Italy, and they were planning to live together in the apartment in Rome. Raquel instantly bristled at this mischaracterization of their relationship, and indignantly set Finelli straight, telling him all she knew about Anna planning to file for divorce. She revealed that in late May, Anna had seen Alton Abramowitz, a divorce attorney. Anna had called Raquel soon after, telling her Carl had brought women to the apartment and left evidence of his indiscretions right out in the open. Raquel also said that when she talked to Anna 2 days before her death, Anna had been spitting mad, madder than she'd ever heard her before, and was threatening to expose Carl for who he really was. But not quite yet, because Carl's connections were opening up a career breakthrough for her soon, and she didn't want to jeopardize that. Unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, everything Raquel had to say was textbook hearsay, useless in court. Now, while all of this was happening, Natalia had called Carl's apartment again, not yet knowing Anna's fate because she never received a return phone call. And she was surprised to have an unfamiliar man answer the phone. It was Jerry Rosen, a man acting as Carl's lawyer at that point. And he actually ended up being the one that broke the news to Natalia, telling her he was at the apartment, quote, getting a few things. a lawyer herself, Natalia was instantly suspicious. He was trying to remove evidence. So she went to the Chicago PD where she lived, and they connected her to the NYPD's Detective Finelli, who spoke to her while Raquel and Tom were there, as they loosely knew each other. And she let them all in on Ana's activities as she knew it, photocopying evidence for her divorce plans and secreting them away in apartment 34E, the apartment in Rome, or both places. The prosecutor there at the time, Marcia Bashford, assured them that she would contact the Italian authorities to seal up Ana's Rome apartment so nothing could be touched. The police now had a warrant to search apartment 34E, partly based on what Raquel and Natalia had to say. So they were now looking for secreted away photocopied papers and documents, while Carl was sent to Rikers Island on $250,000 bail. With the warrant, they photographed everything and dusted the window for prints. The attic room did contain evidence of Carl's mistresses, a letter from Berlin, and hotel credit card and phone bills. One thing that was absent from the search: footprints on the windowsill. Also missing: photocopies. What Natalia said Ana told her was in the apartment just wasn't there, only making Natalia more convinced that Rosen's getting some things wasn't all that innocent, and that someone had removed something from the apartment before the police could search it. Carl didn't spend long on Rikers Island. His large network of supporters had been busy, and one of them thought to contact an old friend of Carl's, who might be able to help, Frank Stella. According to Katz's book, he did help, sending a check for the entire bail amount, $250,000. Other sources say he sent less, but still contributed substantially. Also, in the midst of getting Carl off Rikers Island, word had reached his gallerist and friend Paula Cooper, and she arranged for the hire of a proper lawyer for Carl, Jack Hoffinger, of the Park Avenue law firm Hoffinger, Friedland, Dobrich, Bernfeld, and Hassan. Already in the investigation, problems were piling up that would make things difficult if the case went to trial. The two sets of crime scene photos didn't match. Things had been touched in between, like clothing and a lamp were moved, which could be considered contamination in court. There were no photos of the body at the scene. It was discovered that Ana was drunk at the time of her death. Her blood alcohol level was 0.18, and the New York legal limit was 0.10. But there were no other drugs, and she was also not pregnant. Also, Ana's life was pretty much an open book, but Carl's friends and acquaintances put up a brick wall, not wanting to talk to anyone or to give any info about the intensely private Carl, making it very difficult to gather information. Ana's family was furious at Carl. He gave excuses as to why he'd never contacted them. He tried to say he didn't have Raquel's number. Then he tried to give Raquel and Tom money for Ana's death expenses. But to them, this felt like a bribe and made them even more upset. Then we get to the bulk of what Ana had been up to in the months prior to her death, aside from working towards her career as an artist. According to Natalia, Ana had spent much time and effort discovering Carl's indiscretion, and it had been an up and down roller coaster that was really eating away at her. When Natalia told Ana in Rome that there were rumors of Carl cheating in New York City, and Ana confronted him, he wouldn't admit to anything and basically said even if he was, he wouldn't tell her. But she tracked down the mistress through receipts and learned around May of '85 that he was still seeing her and possibly another woman in New York, plus the woman in Berlin. It was all too much for Ana, and she could no longer continue to look the other way. Carl was not faithful, had never been, and wasn't going to change. This was when Ana had her first visit with divorce attorney Alton, where he told her that because they'd been married for such a short time, she wouldn't be entitled to anything. If she could wait things out, she would be in a better position. She needed proof of indiscretion to have a leg to stand on. So Ana took gathering evidence against Carl seriously. This had been when she told Natalia she wanted to expose him, so everyone would publicly know that he wasn't the Carl they thought he was. She even tried to talk Natalia into helping her catch Carl in the act. Here was her plan, according to Natalia. They would wear disguises and take photos of Carl with the other woman. Once they had their photos, they would rip the disguises off so Carl would know the jig is up. And then they would turn and run like crazy because Carl would be pissed. Natalia said they never actually followed through on this scheme, but she had no doubt that Ana was completely serious about doing it. Ana was finally cremated according to her family's wishes on Monday, September 16th, 1985, which also happened to be Carl's 50th birthday. A grand jury hearing was held to decide if Carl could be charged with 2 counts, intent to kill Ana and acting with depraved indifference. Both came with murder in the 2nd degree. Since New York abolished the death penalty, this was the highest charge and carried a maximum of life in prison and a minimum of 15 years. The grand jury indicted Carl on both counts, and Carl officially pleaded not guilty. While everyone prepared for trial, Ana's Rome apartment entered the picture again. Marcia Bashford, the prosecuting attorney, tried to have it sealed right after Carl's arrest to preserve any evidence that might be there. But now, for some reason, Carl asked for the key. He said there was a deposit box of some sort containing his and Ana's money and some of her jewelry, and he wanted his part. When contacted, the landlord was irate about the place to begin with. He said he was losing money on it because the window had been left open and it rained inside and was causing problems in the unit below. Plus, the rent was behind by several months, which was really strange since Ana had told both Natalia and Raquel in June of 1985 that the rent had been paid for by Carl for 1 full year, so it should have still been within that paid time frame. Bashford had run into red tape sealing the apartment, so Raquel and her mother got plane tickets to Rome for that April. Before they were able to fly out, the landlord suddenly said he had the keys and was now pissed because food had been left in the refrigerator to rot and had caused a bad smell everywhere in the building. How did he get the key? Well, now Carl had his lawyer, Hoffinger, get it to the landlord. But Carl told Raquel's lawyer the key had been missing. Well, if it ever had been, it was found now. And the landlord was threatening to literally throw Ana's stuff out into the street. Until they could get there and so they could calm down the landlord, Raquel had Ana's stuff moved to storage. Then, on April 10th, Carl's case, it was thrown out of court. Yeah, the indictment was dismissed because the judge said the integrity of the grand jury was impaired, but she did allow for the prosecutor to try to do a better job and try to re-indict Carl. Raquel and her mother did go to Rome and went through all of Ana's things. Disappointment, they didn't find any money or jewelry actually, and it was at the last minute that they discovered Ana's evidence against Carl. Something Raquel had been obsessed with locating. Ana had it hidden in a manila envelope in the front pocket of one of her art portfolios. Photocopies, nude photos of the woman in Berlin, and papers linking Carl to 3 women from May 1984 to June 1985. Now, a second grand jury session was held from July through December 1986. On December 29th, it was thrown out again, and the prosecutor, Bashford, she was thrown off the case. The judge was super pissed because Bashford apparently kept including hearsay and the stuff about the affair and the divorce without actual legal proof. So Elizabeth Lederer took over the case from Bashford, but she felt it was really an uphill climb. Should she even try for a 3rd indictment? She found she was dealing with an ex-prosecutor and an entire police force who were convinced that Carl murdered Ana. But she also had a pile of legal errors, a pissy judge, bad police work, and 2 cases of it being thrown out of court already. But she told the judge she was going to go before the grand jury one more time. Lederer truly did her homework, and the 3rd indictment came in March of 1987. And in June of 87, it was agreed that the case would go to trial with a new judge, Justice Alvin Schlesinger, presiding. The trial was set to start in November of 87, but was pushed to January of 1988. As soon as the case was on trial, old Hoffinger, well, he had a trick up his sleeve and shocked everyone when he asked for his client to waive his right to a jury trial, which meant that the case would be argued before the judge and decided by the judge. At trial, any mention of Ana's plans to divorce Carl was actually inadmissible for the most part, because Carl didn't know Ana's plans while she was alive, so no one could know his reaction to her wanting to divorce him. Carl's defense team during the trial, they did take to attacking Ana as a person, but, you know, respectfully. Hoffinger tried to turn her into a lesbian and kept referring to her interest in Santeria erroneously as voodoo. using blood in her artwork, and her continued support of Fidel Castro were also brought up for some reason. However, during the time of the trial, a show featuring Ana's work opened, with many people getting to see a cohesive portrait of her work for the first time. It was a pleasant surprise, with her work and her instincts as an artist being praised by critics and the public. Lederer and Hoffinger, for the most part, competently argued their case in front of Schlesinger. Lederer was going for intentional murder, and Hoffinger for accidental death or sub-intentional suicide, which is basically that she committed suicide but kind of didn't mean to. Some important points to the case were brought up at trial. Because there was so much question about Carl's changing stories, there were about 90 minutes worth of time on that Sunday morning of Ana's death that Ana was supposedly alive but unaccounted. Carl said that Ana went to bed at 3 a.m. and he checked and found her missing around 3:30 a.m. Then waited 20 minutes-ish and called 911. But according to time, this doesn't make sense, because the call to 911 should have then come in around 4 a.m., but it didn't. It came in at 5:29 a.m. Now, Natalia, Ana's best friend, spoke to Ana around midnight to 1 a.m. that morning, and Ana was very angry. Remember I said to keep that phone call in mind? Ana wanted to tell Natalia all about her divorce plans and about her plans to hire a private detective, with Carl sitting right there in the apartment. So Natalia asked her to switch to speaking Spanish, which she did, but there were still words that could be plainly deciphered, like divorcio and detective. Is that what happened in those 90 minutes? Did Ana finally confront Carl and fill him in on what she planned to do and all that she knew? After all, before they hung up, Natalia urged Ana to tell Carl everything, not hold it in, for her own sanity and peace of mind. What if she did? Carl did tell Gian Enzo Sperone, an Italian who knew both Carl and Ana and represented Carl's works in Italy, quote, "I loved her. It's impossible, but I was drunk," unquote. People who knew Carl did say his heavy drinking sometimes led to blackouts. Could he have blacked out and that's why there's so much missing time? It's a lot to think about. If Carl did suddenly find out Ana wanted to divorce and expose him, things could have gotten pretty heated. And originally Carl said that they had an argument, but later denied any argument at all. Another point that was made a big deal of was the testimony of the doorman for 11 Waverly Place, Ed Moji. He was set to take the stand for Lederer to detail what he heard as he went for his coffee at 5:30 a.m. on September 8th. But before the trial, he called Lederer and confessed. Because of his time in Vietnam, he had some issues. He had been admitted to a mental hospital several years before due to some mental issues, including auditory hallucinations, aka hearing things. He was doing good now and had responded well to treatment with the drug Halidol, but he was worried that people wouldn't find him credible. He did take the stand, and even Judge Schlesinger didn't seem to hold his past mental health issues against him once he learned that his auditory issues manifested as familiar people whispering to him, not random women screaming no. Although Hoffinger did try to make it seem his hallucinations called his statements into question, but he didn't get too far with that argument. In any event, on February 11th, 1988, Judge Schlesinger returned his verdict, saying, quote, "I have concluded that the evidence has not satisfied me beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is guilty." Unquote. Hoffinger asked that the record of the case be sealed, and his request was granted, which basically means that nothing of the trial even exists. Basically, the slate was wiped clean, and Carl Andre was free to go about his life. The case and the verdict divided the New York City art world. There were pro-Carl and pro-Ana Mendieta people, and you better pick a side. Many fiercely believed Carl was a pussycat and not capable of anything so monstrous, and they defended him passionately publicly. Then there were those who were firmly convinced that he had killed Ana. End of story. Many of Carl's male art contemporaries said he had a feminist cabal against him and viewed Ana like Hoffinger had tried to portray her in court, a loud Cuban who is into some weird shit. Yet some of Carl's biggest defenders were women, even most of his ex-girlfriends and wives. During the trial, the prosecution scoured the world for people who could attest to Carl being abusive, physically or verbally. But despite great effort, they just couldn't get anyone to talk. Some rumors and whispers went around that it was well known that girlfriends of Carl's had bruises, or tales of being assaulted by Carl. Angela Westwater admitted to bearing the brunt of his verbal assaults, but nothing more. And others, including those who'd been with Carl romantically, dismissed all the talk as completely absurd. However, there is one account on record, one that came out long after the trial, that can attest to a side of Carl that he may have kept well hidden. American actress Ellen Barkin, who starred in 80s movies such as The Big Easy and 2007's Ocean's 13, shared a series of tweets in 2020 that were very eye-opening. She said, quote, "I was a 22-year-old waitress working a party for painter Carl Andre. Andre got angry over his service, shoving me against a wall, his hands around my neck, pulling me up until my feet left the floor. 3 men got him off me." Unquote. Side note, I don't know why she said painter Carl Andre. She continued, quote, "Years later, Andre's wife died, falling out of a window. There were signs of a violent fight, a woman screaming, 'No, no, no.' Andre was charged with second-degree murder. He was acquitted of all charges. Hashtag believe women." Unquote. She finished with, quote, "May this POS and his work fall into eternal obscurity. Let's celebrate Ana Mendieta for the brilliant artist that she was." Unquote. This is a sentiment that has followed Carl ever since his acquittal. He has continued to show his work throughout the years, even though he himself has basically become a recluse, doing very little in the way of public appearance, and continuing to stay, to this day, in apartment 34E at 300 Mercer Street in New York City. Anytime there is a Carl Andre show, there is sure to be angry protesters. In 1992, Carl's work, included in a show at the Guggenheim, drew 500 angry protesters. A couple years later, the Guerrilla Girls created a poster likening Carl to O.J. Simpson, who was famously accused of abusing his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and murdering her and her friend Ron Goldman. Guest books and places that displayed Carl's work would have nasty comments written in them. People didn't want to separate the art and the artist, because to many it seemed unfair that Carl continued to pursue his career while Ana's career that she loved and strived for was cut short because of him. Gallerists and owners knew that if they showed Carl, they were going to be met with anger. Maya Garantz, in a Los Angeles Review of Books article published on July 10th, 2017, in response to Carl's work being shown at MoCA in LA, writes about Ana's legacy. Her words are in response to a comment made by Philippe Vernier, MoCA's director and co-curator of the Carl Andre 2017 show. Vernier said, defending his decision to display Carl's art, "Carl broke something, and he was ostracized. And it's part of the story. But the work is there. We are a museum, not a court of law, and he is one of the most important artists of our time." Maya responds to this, writing, quote, "Carl broke something. Something, not someone, not a woman, or an artist on the verge of a major career who hasn't been able to make work for 32 years because she's dead. He broke something. Not just a thing, but something. Something over there. He broke it, and he was ostracized for the thing he broke. Andre has been made to suffer by a society determined to punish him, to push him out. But push him out where? Not out of a window, surely. Out of the art world? The article itself heralds Andre's overdue recognition via the retrospective now coming to MoCA at the end of a 6-year-long worldwide tour. And it is part of the story, only part of the story, but it's not the whole story. How can you reduce a man's life to his breaking of something? Mike Gilbert, O.J. Simpson's agent, quoted Sister Helen Pragine to reporters for years after his acquittal. "We can't judge a man by the worst day of his life, but that's only true if it's the man's story we're telling. Mendieta's story ended the day she died." Unquote. In fact, at the very same opening, protesters didn't let the opportunity to bring light to Mendieta pass them by, distributing postcards that read, quote, "Carl Andre is at MoCA Geffen. Donde está Ana Mendieta?" End quote. Where is Ana Mendieta? It's become a rally cry, not only for people intending to uphold her work and her memory, it has also brought attention to domestic violence and the disparity between men and women in the art world that still exists today. Would Ana approve of this? It's hard to say. Because she was a woman and outspoken, she was often labeled a feminist artist, although she did not claim this label herself in life. In fact, she did not agree with much of the feminist movement. But would she approve of her art and her story, provoking a deep reaction in people and in society? Yes, that is something, in my opinion, Ana would delight in. As I mentioned before, Carl Andre never spoke publicly about Ana's death, not until he was interviewed by Calvin Tompkins of The New Yorker for the article The Materialist. At the end of several days of interviews at Carl's apartment, yes, that apartment, with his now wife, artist Melissa Kretschmer, he didn't think Carl would address the topic of Ana's death, but to his surprise, he did. Here's what Calvin wrote that Carl had to say about it in 2011, 26 years after Ana's death. Quote, "I didn't think that Andre would talk to me about this. I even suspected that the recurrent references in our conversations to his loss of memory might be a way of deflecting the question in advance. Melissa Kretschmer told me that she had never asked him about it, that she trusts him completely, and she tries to shield him from what she calls the haters. In my last meeting with Andre, I asked if it was true, as many people believe, that he had been too drunk on the night in question to remember what happened. To my surprise, he began to speak about it, slowly and quietly, in a way that seemed more focused than usual. I was asleep, he said. I was in bed when I heard cries of no, no, no. It had been quite balmy, like 80 degrees, and the temperature went down to 60 all of a sudden. What Ana did was get up and start closing the windows, because cold air was blowing in. Ana had to climb up. She was, barely 5 feet. To close those windows, you had to do it from the middle so they wouldn't jam. And in trying to close those windows, she just lost her balance. At the trial, a doorman testified that he had heard a few seconds before the body landed on the roof of a Mercer Street deli, a woman's voice high up, screaming, no, no, no. Andre's referring to the cries was striking, and I brought him back to it. Something had awakened me, he said. Maybe it was the fact that Ana wasn't there, next to me in the bed. I expected to see her there. So I was caught half awake and half asleep. And the cries? I asked. That was Ana, he said, unquote. Was this the true account of the events that early morning? They had both eventually gone to bed, and Ana got up to close the window? Or is this what Carl Andre has told himself for so many years that he now believes it? Will we ever really know? Or will the now 86-year-old take the truth to his grave? In the end, this is a story about a tragic incident that will forever remain a mystery. Even though Carl Andre was acquitted, large numbers of people believe he is guilty of something, even if it's only not telling the whole truth. Did Judge Schlesinger make the right decision? He said it right there in his verdict. They failed to convince him beyond a reasonable doubt that Carl was guilty. And without solid evidence, a conviction would have been the wrong choice. And there's no one else who can corroborate or disprove Carl's story. Only 2 people were there on September 8th, 1985. And as the song Secret by the Pierces so eloquently states, 'cause 2 can keep a secret if one of them is dead. What do you think about this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed listening to this video, I would love it if you would give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel if you're interested in videos like this one, and ring the bell to be notified when I post new videos. I have some new videos planned that are coming up, so I would love it if you would stick around and join me for those. And really do let me know your thoughts on this whole story, because I found it completely fascinating in a obviously tragic and horrifying way. So it's unfortunate that her life and her art and her thoughts on everything were just kind of reduced to this tragic death. And I think that's why a lot of people are so angry about the outcome. And also, in all these years, if Carl was innocent and he really didn't do anything to Ana and it was an accident or something else, then, why didn't he say so? That's just something that I can't comprehend, and that's why this case will forever remain a mystery, because truly we will never know all of the full story of what happened that day. So thank you for joining me for this video. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you on my next video. Bye! Here we are. That was... Son of a biscuit, I turned it off. Sugar. You don't want that on? Oh, dang it. That's not funny. Okay. It says not Susan. Ugh, holy smokes. However, there is one account on record. One that came out. Why am I reading? Let me just read it, Stella. Not look at the camera at all.